Let's start this video with one of the best HDR effects what I've seen on my OLED TV so far, Destiny 2.
Hello, old friend. I've chased you for a long time.
Savathun, the Witch Queen. She infiltrated the Vanguard, weakening us from within. Stealing our most sacred resource. The light.
How do we stop this? Welcome back, oh honored guest.
I used to see beauty in people.
It is the mind that must bend to see the truths hidden here.
I see muscle and bones. I wanted to hurt you, but I'm sorry, my friend. This is the end.
The game is yours to play now.
So I'm saying my goodbyes. It's a cruel
Just don't say I didn't warn you.
Unfortunately, I was not able so far to test the PlayStation 5 version. I was just able to test the Xbox Series version, but I'm very sure in terms of HDR, there is no difference between those two versions. And if I will find any difference in the future, I will update you, of course. Let's go straight to the facts. Destiny 2 does not support the HDR calibration menu on the Xbox Series, and I'm very sure the same counts for the PlayStation 5 version as well. But that's not a problem, because this time we have very nice HDR settings. Welcome to the brand new HDR settings in Destiny 2, and this time they're actually working. In the brand new HDR menu we have now two settings called Midpoint and Peak Brightness. Midpoint, you can set up the shadow details if you like to see less or more details, and with Peak Brightness, of course, this is the maximum peak brightness from your TV, and it's actually really good, because what you set up here is exactly what the game is asking to output. Okay, let's start talking about my HDR 10 settings for HGiG and dynamic tone mapping on. And what you can see at the moment are the standard factory settings when you start the game for the very first time with the patch, or when you actually set this to default. So those settings, those values are actually not too bad, especially when you play with dynamic tone mapping on. Then they are actually fitting quite well my HGiG. But of course, 1000 nits, it's a little bit too much for the HGiG or the C1 or even the G1. Okay, so I decided actually to go with 750 after a little bit testing. I found that 750 nits fits my TV the best, and regardless if I'm playing in HGiG or dynamic tone mapping on. But for those two picture modes, or HDR picture modes, HDR display picture mode is actually not a picture mode, but you get my point. I will say something about this a little bit later. So far, 750 and midpoint 50 is for my display a very good value, and again, regardless if I'm playing in HGiG or dynamic tone mapping on. As always, I did a little bit of testing, of course, and I found that the maximum peak brightness setting in the HDR menu are absolutely correct, or almost on the spot. So this analyze screen here at the moment, or this measurement, is taken with maximum peak brightness set to 750 nits, okay, in the HDR setting. And as you can see here, the game is actually right now asking to output 750 candela or nits. This is on the spot, and as you can see here, we have no problem at all to display this nice picture on the HGiG. It is just looking gorgeous, amazing actually in live. Okay, so then of course I did a little bit more testing and I set the maximum peak brightness to the maximum value, which is 2000. And yeah, no surprise, the game is asking now to output 2012 nits, which of course now is a little bit too much for the HGiG. As you can see, we're going in the purple range. And I mean, I have to be fair, on this very moment, at this very moment, you can't see a difference actually, because it is already very bright and there are no details at all in. But there is something very interesting to consider, because when I did the testing with the maximum peak brightness, I measured with my colorimeter a maximum luminance from around 650 candela, which of course is very, very bright. But when I set my settings to the standard 750 or to my preferred value 750, I measured actually 660 candela, a little bit more compared to the higher peak brightness setting in the HDR menu. And of course I did a little bit more testing and I found a very interesting behavior. And please keep in mind, all the pictures or test screen what you're going to see are taken with the same settings. Maximum peak brightness 750 and midtone was set to 50, okay? So at this very moment, I analyzed this one, we have 720 nits maximum output. This is no problem at all for the HGiG. Next test picture as well, 720 nits. Then we go ahead, we have here this little lamps, also 720 nits. But then it was a little bit interesting. Where is my heat map? Here. This picture here suddenly had a maximum output from 1590, 1600 nits. I couldn't understand why, because I didn't change my settings at all. It was still 750 and midtone 50. And I thought, okay, maybe just something weird what HDR is doing whatsoever, just ignore this for now. Let's do a little bit more testing. I found this one. Maximum peak output almost 2800 nits, which of course is way too much for the HGiG, but again, my settings were still the same, 750 maximum peak luminance. Okay, here the same, over 2000 candela suddenly with exactly the same setting, and I didn't know actually what to say. This is a screenshot from the very beginning, what I showed you in the intro. Same settings, 750 nits, but right now the game is asking to output 2900 nits. And there's nothing what we can do about this, because if we would now lower our settings from, let's say, 750 nits to 400 nits to try to meet this picture actually here, and you can see the purple elements, way too much for the HGiG. But if we would now lower our settings, we would end up with a terrible HDR picture in different areas. The more I analyzed those screens, the more I was actually convinced, or I believed at some point, that this was done on purpose to have a different or some sort of different HDR experience. Because with, how should I say, with over brightness some elements you get actually very cool effects sometimes. And in this case, when we're just thinking about this, that's behind the clouds where the sun is, it's actually very, very bright. And if we just now over brighten this like ridiculous, then it is more likely the same as outside, because there is not much what you can see around the sun, okay? It's just too bright for our eyes, and this is the effect what you get. This is actually what I really think is happening here. And at this very moment, I don't think that HDR is broken. HGiG or dynamic tone mapping on when you play in HDR10, that's always the question. And in case of Destiny 2, I would almost recommend dynamic tone mapping on. Not just almost, okay? I think that HGiG is a little bit too dark in this game, and even you increase the mid-tone to, let's say, 60 or 70, you just get more details in very dark areas, like better shadow details, but you will not brighten up the picture. So that's why dynamic tone mapping on is so far, in my opinion, the better choice. And there's another thing. So this is the very same scene what I showed you before, where I measured or analyzed almost 2000 nits, okay? So with HGiG, everything is blown out, everything is clipping, I can't see any detail, because 2000 nits and HGiG, that's not working, okay? Dynamic tone mapping on the other hand, you can still see that there are too bright object. It is clipping, but you can see much more because dynamic tone mapping on is now analyzing the screen, finds that there are plenty of very bright objects, and dynamic tone mapping on is just doing a great job right now compared to HGiG, as you can see hopefully on your screen. So that's the reason, those 2 points. Base brightness is a little bit too less in HGiG, and certain situations like this, HGiG is just clipping very bright objects. So dynamic tone mapping on in Destiny 2, my recommendation. Okay, what about Dolby Vision now? So this game is not mastered in Dolby Vision. So when you use the Dolby Vision picture mode on your TV, then the game takes the HDR10 metadata, okay? So there's no difference in terms of the visual quality from the HDR effects, okay? Let's say it like this. But there's something what we need to consider. So first of all, Dolby Vision, the behavior from Dolby Vision is exactly the same like HGiG, okay? So there's no dynamic change in brightness whatsoever, and therefore we have also a very bad clipping from very bright objects, actually the same as in HGiG, okay? So just dynamic tone mapping on in the HDR10 format will get us more details here. And the other very important thing is that in almost every game, when you do Dolby Vision versus HDR10, you can actually increase the maximum peak brightness in the option menu from the game a little bit when you use Dolby Vision to meet the same output in terms of brightness compared to HDR10. So in this case, exactly the same. So I measured around, I think 680 candela. It was the maximum peak brightness on a certain object in this game with HGiG. To meet, and this was with setting 750, okay? So for HDR10. And to meet exactly the same maximum output, what I measured with my colorimeter, I had to set this to 800, okay? So if I would leave this to 750, I would end up with with less maximum peak brightness or output on my TV, okay? So this is something to consider. But I mean, feel free to play this game in Dolby Vision. Just keep in mind, if your TV is, let's say, capable of 1000 nits, try 1100 or whatever with Dolby Vision, okay? Don't stick to 1000 because this is a little bit too less probably, and you will, how should I say, waste a little bit of power from your TV, okay? This is always what we need to keep in mind. Dolby Vision appears to be a little bit darker compared to HDR10. Therefore, we can increase the maximum peak brightness in the option menus from the games a little bit. Okay, last but not least, we have the option midpoint, and this setting is purely about the shadow details in very dark areas. So this option does not affect or change the maximum peak luminance on your TV. So I did testing, of course, and I analyzed a couple of very bright objects, and I measured with my colorimeter the peak brightness on my TV, and I set the midpoint to 0, to 50 and 100, and the result was almost the same. In setting 0 I had 683, in setting 50 it was 678, and in setting 100 679. So you can see there is literally no difference at all. So that means you can set up this as you like it, but of course keep always in mind 0 and 100, that's not right. Okay, my friends, so that's it for this video, and the HDR settings in Destiny 2 are very straightforward, thanks God. I mean, it would be easier, of course, if this game would support the HDR calibration menu on the consoles, but unfortunately not. But this is actually very, very nice. If we would now maybe change the name from midpoint to shadow details or whatsoever, then maybe it would be even better. But yeah, I really like it. So all what you need to know is actually the maximum peak brightness from your TV, and then you go with this setting, okay? If you don't know your maximum peak brightness, then Google it, or maybe look up websites like Artings, because they're testing a lot of TVs and maybe they tested your TV as well. So just put the value in and there you go. If you like to use Dolby Vision, always keep in mind, increase it a little bit. So for an example, let's say your TV is capable of, according to some testing, capable of 1000 nits, okay, and now you like to play this game in Dolby Vision, I would actually recommend to go around 1100, okay, for starters, okay, because I learned that Dolby Vision is always outputting a little bit darker compared to HDR10, okay. If you're using HDR10, and this is regardless if you're using HGiG or dynamic tone mapping on, then go exactly with the testing result from the websites or whatever your TV is capable of, okay? That's very important. And again, in terms of the midpoint setting, 50 is the standard setting. I found this actually not too bad, but sometimes I think maybe I like to increase it a little bit. But this is, again, absolutely up to you. I would actually say values between 25 and 75 are not very bad for this game, or they're actually fitting this game, okay? Closer to 0 or closer to 100 will just shift it a little bit. It doesn't look good anymore, okay? But feel free to try it on your own, because this again is not affecting HDR at all, okay? So feel free to do some testing on your own. And I think that's enough for this video. I say thank you very much for watching me, and if you're new to my channel, please like and subscribe. I'll see you guys next time. Bye.